Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is Gina Gardiner, a leadership person and a radio star and an interviewer and a person who I think is going to give us a lot of things to think about, but also just have a good time having a conversation about things that we share and we find as being very interesting. So thank you for being here. And
it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So tell us a little bit about who you are, where you are, and how you ended up having a radio show that is it spanned the globe? Sort of?
It does indeed, yes, it does. We're at just under 3 million listeners a month now, and they come from all over.
Oh,
yeah.
I am honored to have you here. Wow.
Thank you. So very potted history. I started my professional life as a teacher. I found I was very good at it. I was promoted very quickly and promoted to be the catalyst for change. I was 28 and became the deputy principal of a large school. And then 6 months after I was promoted, we'd been doing all the strategic development. I went off skiing in the February half term. In those days, it was the done thing to have skis as long as possible. And I spent the whole week wrapping that extra 10 centimeters around my neck. And on the penultimate day, I'd had a bad fall and I'd said to my friends, you go off, I'm going to just get my confidence back. Met them for lunch. They said, come with us. We found a wonderful new run. Off we went. Beautiful day. Sun was shining. Got off the chairlift and I followed them, went round the corner, and it was pretty evident that they'd taken the wrong turning. So instead of it being a 6-kilometer red run, it was a black diamond run with 6-foot moguls. And I had a really bad fall. In fact, I fell between 150 and 200 feet. At the time, sitting on a mogul, but it was a very hot day, one of those beautiful days that you get end of February. And there was nowhere to bounce, and so I just kept on bouncing until I found somewhere that was flat enough. And really, life had never been the same since. It took me a while to get back to school, and then I went skiing with the children at school. I was the deputy borough leader. We had 150 young pupils with us. And at the end of the week, I didn't feel very well. Went to lie on my bed and found that I was paralyzed down one side. Got back to school eventually, but wasn't right. Got to the end of the school year and thought, I'm going to be able to have 6 weeks. We get a 6-week summer holiday. I'm going to spend that time recovering. 10 days in, phone call very, very early in the morning. It was my principal or head teacher's wife. She was hysterical that John Hughes, my lovely head teacher, had died in his sleep. And so instead of the rest, I had to let the staff, the parents, the local authority know, help her organise the funeral. And I was acting principal, acting head teacher. And I was appointed 4 months later to be the permanent head. And I was the head of that school for just over 20 years. And I ran the school for the most part from a wheelchair, and at times completely wheelchair bound. And there was a huge gift in that. And the gift was that I had to find a way of enabling my staff to take radical responsibility for their own performance and a shared responsibility for the team. Because I couldn't physically get into the classrooms. If I could get in through the door, I couldn't get round them. So I had to find a way where delegation meant that they took the responsibility for performance, and we had a shared understanding of what did excellence look like in the context of every aspect of school. It was highly successful. We were on the best 100 schools list of schools in the country list twice during my tenure. We were one of the first beacon schools. We got lots and lots of accolades and awards. And I then spent time working with other schools. Our budget was rubbish. And so over the years, I worked as an Ofsted inspector. I worked as an advisor for the government, all to bring an income into school, but also to keep things at cutting edge. And the principles that I developed within school about enabling people to first and foremost lead themselves and then lead others in an authentic way have been the bedrock of the work that I've done with business owners and businesses since 2004, well, beginning of 2005, when I left school, and I left education because of my health. So I did a research project to look at were the issues facing businesses, corporate and SMEs, were they the same as we faced in school in terms of the development of leadership? Of course they were. I wrote my first couple of books and they became my calling card. And I initially worked mainly with corporates doing training facilitation. I was a qualified coach. I became an NLP master practitioner. And then in the last recession, 2008-9, all of my contracts, for the whole year's contracts, disappeared in a week, because the first thing big corporates do is to cut their training and development budget. But by this time, I was doing work for Essex University Business School, and I was commissioned to go and work with companies, always invited back. And so I started to work in a different way, which was to work on a retainer with smaller businesses. And within 10 months, all of them much more profitable, but because the leadership was done in a very enlightened and holistic way. Had a greater sense of purpose. And so my mission is to positively impact at least 1 million leaders within the next 3 years, to help them develop leadership which is based on integrity, compassion, and the courage to do what's right. And if you look around the world, there's never been a greater need for a shift in the way in which people lead.
Wow, what a story. I'm touched by it.
Thank you.
Mostly because at a point in your young life where you could have become very depressed and despondent over the loss of your mobility, you didn't. And I want to know how, what was it that enabled you to think differently about who you were, who you are, and what you were going to do, even as you were bound to a wheelchair?
I think the first thing to say is that there were dark days. It wasn't all sunshine and
Sure.
roses and rainbows.
Yeah.
But I think for me, the defining thing was that I had such a strong sense of purpose, that I wanted to make a positive difference. And if I could find a way to do that without the school in any way being disadvantaged, then that was important to me. And so I think for anyone, the resilience you get when you have a strong sense of purpose, it's what gets you up in the morning when life is challenging. That purpose is bigger than the challenge, if you like. And I think the other thing for me, I mean, my mum used to call me bloody minded, and I think that being stubborn can have its benefits. I'm very blessed in that I do have a positive look on life. But I think for me, the thing that made the difference, particularly twice I learned to walk after a failed back surgery. It took me 18 months to learn to walk. 3 months later, I had ruptured another disc and had another failed back surgery and was completely wheelchair bound. What kept me going was, look at what you can do. It's so easy to get caught up in the, I can't do this because. And I think many business owners and leaders at the moment are caught up in that. I can't do that because of the economy. I can't do that because of my staff. I can't do that because I'm not experienced enough. And I think if you start from the premise, what can I do? How can I move forward? And there was a day I'd been in hospital 6 or 7 weeks. I'd come out, I'd been home 3 days, and I realized if I stayed at home, it was reading and daytime telly. And daytime TV doesn't do it for me.
Yeah.
I couldn't make a cup of tea if nobody had left it out, a cup and out and filled the kettle. But if I went into school, my brain worked, my mouth worked, my eyes and my hands worked. That's what I needed. And so I could go in and be fruitful about what I was doing, or I could sit at home and be on my own and know that I was not able to do anything productive. Now, it wouldn't suit everybody, and it probably wasn't sensible. I mean, it was 6 months later that the consultant said, I think we'll talk about you going back to school a couple of hours a day. I just laughed. I'd been back full time after a week of coming in, out of hospital. And as I say, it wouldn't suit everyone, but it was right for me. And the premise then was, what can I do? And how do I make sure that whatever is happening within the school is contributing to children getting the best possible education and staff getting the best possible development? And that's what kept me going when life was difficult.
Did your physical limitations mean that you had to have a different perspective on what leadership was?
That's an interesting question. There's certainly, I had to have a different perspective on how to manage practicalities. A great sense of humor is very, very helpful. It's incredible practice at solution finding, because if you are in particularly if you're completely wheelchair bound, I'm not these days, thankfully, you have to be very creative about how you manage things. But in terms of the perspective, I think for me it was, I need to find ways to manage this. I've got to be totally in solution mode. Otherwise, this is going to beat me. So it was almost a competition, if you like. Is the disability going to stop me doing the things that I want to? And of course, it has stopped me doing a number of things, but it doesn't stop you leading. What it does do, and I think one of the gifts of the disability, I'd like to think I'd have done it anyway, but I'm honest enough to know I'd have probably interfered too much. There is no way you can micromanage if you can't physically be there in the same place.
That's where I'm going with that, because what I'm hearing you say is that you had to become a facilitator of your teachers' leadership, your staff's leadership, and that collaborative level of leadership is probably why your schools were honored in the way they were.
And let's just take away the word probably.
Okay,
because
they were honored for that.
I think they're honored for the outcome of that approach, not for that specifically, but the outcome of that approach is that instead of people, and this has worked in schools, not only my own, because I've done it worked with many schools, and since I've worked with businesses since 2005, it works in businesses too. That when you can get the leader, whether that's of a small team or a big company, to recognize that first and foremost, you have to lead yourself. You have to take radical responsibility for your thoughts, your beliefs, your actions, and your words, or lack of them. And then when you do that, then instead of saying you can't get the right staff, or that's not working, it is, the question is very different. It is, what is it I need to be doing as a leader that will lead us towards the success criteria that I've set out? And so knowing what you want to achieve is important, and then looking for ways to empower other people who have got ownership of that same vision, mission, whatever you like. That becomes the focus. How do I empower the people who are working with me, and how collectively do we deliver whatever it is we're trying to deliver? And it's incredibly powerful, because instead of it all coming through you as the leader being the fount of all preferment and the fount of all knowledge, and you're the arbiter of standards, you have then created people who are not only really engaged, but they're skilled. That you create a learning culture where everybody wants to be even better. and they not only want themselves to be better, but they want the team and the organization to be better. And so success, not only does it happen, but you can build on that success, and that's an ongoing process. And so most companies succeed. If they do succeed, they succeed, and then you see them go down the curve of improvement. And because they continue to do the same thing rather than looking for continuous improvement, they gradually deteriorate. And we've seen lots of it, particularly in the UK, of very successful firms have gone to the wall because they've continued to do what they've always done, rather than always looking for how do we move this forward in the current climate.
I see the same things, and they think that what they learned one year is universal and will last forever, and it doesn't. And as a result, they end up simply running their business rather than leading their business, and as a result, I guess really what my question is that when you went in to work with these businesses, were they prepared to hear what you had to say to them?
It's an interesting question again. In the first instance, I went to people that I'd already worked with. And so, and very often I'd been commissioned to go in and do something completely different. So let me give you an example. I went to work with a hotel. The three directors had just inherited the hotel from their father, and they knew nothing about the hotel business. The hotel was £8 million in debt. It was it had something like 23% occupancy Monday to Thursday, and even less at the weekend. It was like the Mary Celeste during the day. And I was initially commissioned to go in and do a training session on communication. And as always, I asked, what is it you'd like to get out of this? What's going on? I had that conversation. And I said to them, I can deliver what I've been commissioned to do, because this was through the university. I can deliver that, but I don't think that's what you need. I think there's some fundamental issues here that need to be looked at long before we start to do a training session on communication. Now, I worked with that hotel for 5 years. By the time we finished, they were out of debt. The hotel had been completely refurbished. They had 87% occupancy. They had a staff who were vibrant. The place was busy all the time. Why? Because we started with the real basics, which were to get those three directors understanding what their role was, to know individually and collectively what their role was, to look at their staff. And they discovered they hadn't realized that their general manager was stealing hand over fist. Stuff was being delivered in one door and going out into a van and another door.
Wow.
And we worked with the staff to create a vision, and to then look at how that was going to be established. So I'll give you one small example. I asked them when I first started working with them, what's going to happen at Christmas? And they said, well, we'll do what we've always done. I said, what level of interest have you got? It's very small. So when did you start to market your Christmas parties and your Christmas residential? Oh, we start in October. So it became pretty evident that things needed to change. So with the staff, and we'd done some training in terms of a lot of training in terms of how their individual department managers would work. We started to create an exercise which looked at, if you're going to advertise Christmas, when is it useful to advertise Christmas? And it was determined that actually it's useful to advertise on the previous Christmas, because then when people come to parties, you can advertise next year's party and give them a deal. So if you're going to advertise it, when does the copy need to be into the printer, so the printers can have the materials ready for you? And so it's a very simple exercise, which is to start reverse engineering. But if you don't think about what needs to happen and you're always firefighting, you're going to be on the back foot, aren't you?
Yeah.
And that's a tip of the iceberg of the strategic planning that went on. But by year 3, they had filled about 45% of the next year's Christmas party dates before the Christmas. So they
Yeah.
only had 55% of their places to sell, and they had from Christmas until the next Christmas to sell those.
And this isn't brain surgery.
No,
It's
no, it's
simple.
common
It's
sense.
simple planning and execution of a plan. But I find that people don't understand that. And
You know, why do we call it common sense? Because it's not very common very often, is it?
I totally agree with you. I had a similar experience to you with the recession, and I lost all my business within 6 weeks. And
Yeah, I have to say the recession was not good for my business at all.
and what I found was two things, and I'm interested in your reflection on this. The first is that they just thought that, oh, we'll get through this and we'll be back to normal, and I knew that
Yes.
that's not going to happen. And
Yeah.
and I would say that to them. It says, you have to you have to recognize this as a game-changing event. The second thing was they decided that the only thing that mattered to them was money, and that they didn't see beyond that. So they were hiring uh, subject expert consultants who primarily would show them how to make more money, improve their revenue. And I'm not that person. So I was doing other, the sort of things that you're doing. It was really clear that this approach was not going to survive very long. And so by the end of 2014, I had not had I can say that until right now, I haven't had any consulting work in 10 years. And so I've had to do other things. You have to reinvent yourself and do other things. But I'm beginning to have conversations that would lead me back into doing consulting. I mean, I've had those this week for the first time in 10 years. So, so there's this sense that things are changing. Things were changing. Things did change. And now they're continuing to change. And the question is, how do I immerse myself in that change so that I figure out what I'm supposed to do that allows us to succeed or to be at our best in going forward. So in those situations, what do you have to say to people who have had a difficult time dealing with change and need to really see that change is kind of the constant that we all have to deal with?
Well, there are 3 constants in life, aren't there? Death, taxes, and change, and we're changing all the time. Incidentally, my whole the group of businesses I was working with at the beginning of the pandemic were forcibly closed by the government because of the very nature of the sort of businesses they were. But what I would say to people is I think we are moving from a profit-led economy where the only thing that business owners are interested in is money.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, I think that they have forgotten that the treasure in any company is the people.
Mm-hmm.
And stress and burnout and anxiety and depression have become the watchword.
Mm-hmm.
And that in 2019, and that's when the latest complete figures come from the UK, and I believe that the situation pro rata in terms of numbers is the same in the US, is that in 2019, 75 billion pounds, not dollars, was lost because of days due to stress.
Mm-hmm.
And 140 billion pounds was lost because of presenteeism, which is people present physically, but not firing on all cylinders because of stress. Now, in my experience, and I've worked with many companies, very, very different backgrounds, very different types of companies, but the same use the same underpinning principles adopted for whichever organization, and the outcome has been the same. That when you have started with the premise that if I really engage and I nurture and I grow my staff, and they've got ownership of the vision, of the mission, and we work holistically, that they feel supported, that what they're doing is valued, the profits come, and the profits are maintained. It's sustainable over time. When you start from the money side, people get given targets which are, you've got to increase your productivity by 10%, but they're having to do it with fewer resources, and they're not attainable. So people are being given it's a stick to beat people with. They lose heart, they don't feel ownership of it, and they feel that what they do is not valued.
Yeah.
And as a result, you lose your best people because they can vote with their feet and go and find a company that does look after them. And the rest of them are, you've got a sick working environment. So I think the conversation I would be having with any company, and do, is let's look at your underpinning principles. First and foremost, are you, as a leader, how are you leading? Are you leading in an enlightened way, in a way that engages with people, that really makes them feel nurtured and valued, where you're kind? Now, I don't mean pink and fluffy kind. I
Right.
don't mean self-indulgent kind, but you can have a different sort of feedback if you've got high expectations which are shared, and people know that you care about them. You can go and say, do you know what, Ed, I don't think this is as good as you can do. I'm really looking for you to do your very, very best here. And then you have a really clear shared understanding of what best looks like. What does excellence look like in the context of that?
Yeah.
Then when it comes from the place that you really care about that person, in my experience, in my own organization and in other organizations, that people take it on the chin and then want to be better, because they know it's coming from a good place, rather than you're simply having a go at me, and that is demotivating. So you have to have the relationships, and that has to be based on mutual respect and trust. And I believe it comes from a place of kindness. So I'll give you a couple of examples of what I mean. There are a number of bosses who, when things are going well, it's all hail fellow, well met. And when things aren't going well, they don't have the emotional control or intelligence to actually manage their anger or their frustration first. They go and they just blurt it all out, and they burn the bridge, which is the relationship that they have built. Now, if you burn a bridge, it's a long walk round, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Whereas if you have done the deep dive work on yourself, you can say to the person, Ed, we need to talk about this, but I'm just going to get myself together because I don't want to say something that's going to be inflammatory or wrong, but give me half an hour and then let's have a conversation. And then they start with a conversation with, Ed, what do you think? Let's look at this. What's your thoughts? And they can manage a situation in a developmental way because they've managed themselves first. And then do it without burning the bridge. Do it in a way that the person knows exactly. Because one of the other problems is that people say that's not good enough. It needs to be better. What the hell does that mean? We've got a blueprint for what every word means, but my blueprint is likely to be different to yours. So that's when having a very clear shared understanding of what does it mean in the context of excellence. What are the behaviors we expect? What are the actions that we expect to happen consistently? And discussing that as a team and coming up with the gold standard that then everybody subscribes to. And standards then go up, and you make monitoring part of everyday life. And it's not about waving a stick. It is about what can we learn? How can we be even better?
Right.
Because ultimately, if you're not learning, you've got no forward momentum. If you've got no forward momentum, your company is doomed sooner or later.
I think part of the problem that we face is that people aren't trained or developed or even educated to do any of this. And
Well, promotion comes because you're a good salesperson or a good technician, doesn't it?
or you just follow the rules.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not you don't create conflict. Yeah, it's a it's a remarkable time that we're in, I see, and it's a time of extraordinary transition from the way things used to be, and or in many places the way they are now, to something that's going to be different. And I think you've already identified that it'll be a place that's like the schools that you led, where the people recognized that they had responsibility, but they were also supported in their responsibility, and that they were, that's what I see. I've had, and this is leading to another question. I talk with people all the time. I mean, I don't care where I am. I'm going to have a conversation. If we're standing at a crosswalk, I'm going to say, "How you doing? What's up today? What are you doing today?" I mean, I'm going to ask those kind of questions. And one of the things I find is that that the generations have very different perspectives on what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
And I want and one of the things I did, I was introduced to a young woman in Switzerland who was a law student, and she was the head of a leadership program at her school. And so she set up an event where I spent 2.5 hours with her group of leadership students, and they weren't being mentored by anyone. They were just doing this out of their own interest. And out of that emerged 3 things that defined these 20-year-olds. So these would be Gen Zers. One was that they were disappointed in the way the world was. Mm-hmm. The second thing was they have genuine fear about the future. And the third thing, they wanted to understand what it meant to have purpose. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I don't know a single person in my age group who's asking those questions, who are thinking in those terms. And that every generation, we're talking about 4 generations really kind of working together now, and those 4 generations have very different outlooks on the way the world is and what needs to happen in their lives, and what they're willing to do, what they're willing to give up in order to work. And particularly these Gen Zers, they will not work if it means they're going to work for someone they don't like. And so they're going to define what the future of business looks like in the next 20 years, 30 years. And we need to be paying attention to that. So what is it that you see in terms of the difference in these generations that can help us better understand what do we need to be doing as business leaders to lead our companies, or even beyond that, to lead our communities?
I believe, as I say, that we're moving from a profit-led environment to a purpose-led environment. And by that, it is, as a company, whatever your company may be, what is it that I am doing that makes a positive difference to the people within the company, to the people that we serve, either our product or our service, mm-hmm. and how are we using the environment? Are we going to leave a positive legacy? And I think for me, legacy is often talked about in terms of when people die or people finish. But for me, it's about a living legacy, and every word that we speak, every action that we take or not, and the way in which we do, leaves a legacy. And so I think more and more the youngest workers are going to be determining, I will work for a company that is going to create a living, positive legacy
Mhm.
I don't want to be working with those who are abusing the environment or abusing their workers, and they won't stand for it. They'll vote with their feet. And that, well, those who are the most skilled and the most, who have the most attractive CVs, for want of a better way to put it, they will be the ones that will be the most mobile.
Yeah.
And they will vote with their feet, and they will go and find I know it's happening because I do quite a lot of mentoring people through the application process when they are going for leadership jobs. And without exception, one of the things that has made them come and work with someone like me is because they've been unhappy where they've worked, that they have felt that they weren't valued. They felt that the company didn't care about them, that they were completely expendable. And so they've wanted to work in a company that of whatever sort that makes a difference. So I think that when you take that further, those companies that haven't got the right sort of culture, that actually don't know what they're about, that, you know, it amazes me how many companies don't really have a clear view about what is it that we are doing. Yeah, we're making this, but in real terms, what is that like? So I'll give an example. Working with somebody in logistics who'd got lorry drivers, you know, they've moved goods about the country. And about 18 months ago, there's a terrific shortage of drivers in the UK. And that meant that lots of shops had empty shelves because they couldn't get stuff from one place to another, and perishable goods were being wasted. And we were having a conversation, and I just said to him, "What sort of advert are you putting out?" And he said, "Well, my advert says that so many hours a week, so much pay for weeks, so many weeks holiday." I said, "What is it your company does?" And he looked at me a bit strangely and said, "Well, we're logistics, we move things about." I said, "Well, what does that do for the country?" And after a bit of toing and froing, he said, "Well, we're the very lifeblood of the country. Without us, nothing would work." So I said, how do you treat your people?" And we said, "Well, we can't do it without them. We value them. We want to train them. We want to look after them." And I said, "Well, it's not in your advert. Your advert gives no clue at all that you are a company that actually has a leader who is really thinking about what they're doing, and that will care about them." So a whole shift, not only in the advert, but also in the way that they interviewed and inducted people, led to them getting a greater share of the drivers that were looking for work than they had ever done before. Why? Because they'd thought about what was their true purpose,
Yeah.
and how could they communicate that in a way. There is a caveat, of course.
Yeah.
Words are cheap. So it's no good having all of these grandiose words, and actually that's not what you do, because people won't stay. So authenticity, being genuine, that's why my company is called Genuinely You, being really genuine about what you're offering, who you are, what you're doing, is really important. And for those people who really are struggling to know what's my purpose, very often they think my purpose has to be global. It's got to be on a grand scale. And I would say, live your life intentionally. You know, be the leading professional in whatever you are doing, whether that's the washing up or taking the rubbish out or being a brain surgeon. Do whatever you're doing in your because these are lessons for life, not just for work. Be intentional about how you turn up moment by moment. And very often, through that very act of intentionality, a sense of purpose begins to emerge. But for me, I think purpose has within it a large element of service.
Yeah.
It's how can you add value to other people, whether that service is to people or to animals or to the environment. It is about that that something bigger than you, that you can make a difference. And for those people who say, but there's only me and what can I do? Spend the night in a room with a mosquito and you'll know that very small things have the power to have a very big impact.
Yeah.
And be a mosquito, be that persistent energy that actually is going to make a difference. And we can all make a difference. Smile when you see somebody, say hello, random act of kindness, raising your vibration so that you are grateful about things and living in the moment. All of those things have a ripple effect on the people around you. And I believe that complaining and moaning is as dangerous as the coronavirus. It is so catching. It's something that we all need to be mindful of, and look at what look at what we can do rather than moaning about what we can't.
You've had a very interesting life, not just because you had this set of injuries that debilitated you, but you were a teacher, and then you were a school administrator, and then you became a business leader, facilitator, consultant, trainer, catalyst, all those things. And then somewhere in there, you started a radio show. So what was that transition that led into becoming a broadcaster?
Like so many things in life, the first, I've had a number of radio shows over the years, or rather podcasts, or internet-based radio shows. The first one started quite by accident. That I was working with the guy that created my websites and my membership site, did the technology of that, and said, I think you'd make a good host for a radio show, and I've got somebody who's looking for a host. Would you be interested? And so I did that for a year, and that was an hour a week of just me. And I decided that actually to be more interesting, I needed to engage with other people. And so over the years, each one has had a bigger platform. I've never done I create the interviews and do the technology this end, but I've never done the technology in terms of distributing the podcast or the radio show. And each one has led to another opportunity. And then the current one, what really attracted me to this was that it was a syndicated radio rather than an online podcast. So it already had an active audience, and it was going to be easier to track, because the problem with the previous ones is that it would go out and go onto a huge number of platforms, and trying to track what impact you were having it. And the only way you can do it is in terms of numbers. You never really know what impact you've had on people's lives. It was almost impossible to do that. But with this syndicated show, I get my monthly numbers. And before the show, the recording, I was saying to you that previously was on AM FM 24/7. They are stopping using AM as a way of distributing shows. And so Brushwood Media Network was set up. The guy who owns Brushwood Media Network has got TV studios, so it was quite easy for him to do that. I've made a TV series which is hopefully going to go out fairly soon. And so he said, well, why don't you come and work with us? So I started off with one show a week. And then when it moved to Brushwood Media, he said, your show is really popular. We'd like you to do Monday to Friday every day. How do you feel about that? And I said, well, I've always got well prepared. And so I'd got quite a few interviews waiting to be aired. And I'd done live shows, but this one's always pre-recorded, which makes it easier. And so I said, yeah, I'd like to do that. And so now I have 5 days a week, repeated twice in the day. It goes out at 8 a.m. well, 3 a.m. and 6 p.m. Eastern, which is 8 a.m. and 11 p.m. UK. And I've met some absolutely amazing people, yourself being one of them.
Well, thank you. What has been the biggest surprise in doing this this sort of work where you're interviewing people online and now interviewing people on air, having this conversation? What has been the biggest surprise that you've experienced in this?
Surprise. I'm endlessly fascinated with people, and that's been a lifelong thing. But I think the level of, we hear in the media, we get so much negative news.
Mm-hmm.
But I speak to people who are doing amazing things within their own context, who have inspirational stories, who are making a difference, sometimes on a small scale, sometimes on a really significant scale. But what really strikes me is the creativity, the capacity of the human being to engage with life in so many different ways and to overcome such challenges. And it's not a competition, my challenge is bigger than your challenge, but for each person, their life has within it lots of challenges, and people have as many creative ways to deal with that as there are people. And I find that I'm constantly, new doors are opening, things that I've never thought about or never had experience of, that, as I speak to somebody, so it opens up a new way of thinking. It challenges my thinking about stuff that perhaps I've not given a great deal of thought to. So, for example, last week I interviewed somebody who has created a way of helping people with ADHD,
Mm-hmm.
but not looking at the symptoms, but actually retraining the brain. And she's got 15 years experience of this working. And you think, well, why isn't this being shouted from the rooftops rather than putting children on Ritalin? And it works for children, it works for adults. And I get the opportunity to give this person airspace and an opportunity for people who might otherwise never know that there are options. So for me, I think it's a huge privilege that I get to speak to people who are, and even if I don't always agree with necessarily the approaches that people are talking about, or people who are very different to me, I think it's important that we actually get an opportunity to see that variety and to make our own minds up. So just the ingenuity and the variety, the creativity of people, and the intrinsic goodness, because all of the people that I've spoken to, without exception, want to make a positive difference.
I totally agree with you, and that's exactly what my experience has been over the past year doing the Eddie Network podcast. It's and I was intentional in not looking for people who were already known, but rather people who are unknown, who to be asked to be on the podcast would kind of, what, me?
Yeah.
Yes, you have something to say. Really? I said yes. And when they come on, it's magic. It's really magic. And I have greater hope for the future because of having done this than I did a year ago. Because I see that, to a large extent, all people need is for someone to say, I believe in you. I know you can do this. And that confidence is really significant to people. And they've missed that. And they've missed that in business. They've missed that in school. They missed it, in so many places where there's this sense of being put down because they haven't been perfect, or they're not good enough, or they wake up in the morning, they feel like I'm a fraud. I'm really not as good as everybody thinks I am. All those sorts of emotions that we go through, I see them being expressed, and what I seek to do here is simply affirm them and say thank you for who you are. And I have no agenda. I have no expectations. I don't have a standard by which I'm measuring you. You're just you, and I'm just me, and we're having this conversation together. And that's all we're doing. But you see, that is not all that's happening, because what this means, it goes to something you said about the relationships being based on respect and trust.
Mm-hmm.
That's the core. That's exactly what I say to people. Our relationships, if you have to begin with respect, even if you're different or you disagree, but only after respect can you build that trust. And I think that's what you're doing, I suspect, on a grand scale. And I celebrate that, and I'm glad to know you. So
Thank you.
So tell me what, this is my last question, and I'm pretty convinced that I'm going to ask this question from most people that I'm going to interview this year. So what is your hope for the future?
I, like you, I'm very optimistic about the future. There are some dreadful things happening. I've got a Ukrainian refugee living with me. She's been with me since they started the Homes for Ukrainian scheme. And, 2 days ago, her hometown was bombed. I mean, there are unspeakably awful things happening. And yet, I believe that the human race has more good people in it than ever there have been bad. That pretty well everyone wants to feel loved and secure, to feel that they matter. And you talked about that, but belief in people, even when they haven't got belief in themselves. That for me is the side. That's one of the major tenets of an enlightened leader, is that you see the potential in people and that you give them that opportunity to see it for themselves.
Yeah.
Because I think all of us at times have doubts. That's part of the human condition. And I think we live at a time when comparatonitis, I'm comparing myself with the picture I see on social media, or the fact that people, will tell you all of the great highlights of the year on their social media platform. They don't tell you about the days when they've been, swamped and they felt awful. And people have an assumption that it's back to the raindrops and rainbows and unicorns, and that everything for everybody else is okay, but not for me. And for me, that resilience, which is, it doesn't matter how many times you get knocked down, it's how often you get back up again. And in my case, at one time, that was quite literal.
Yeah.
But I think as a metaphor, I think it's really important. And I believe that we have to make a stand. We have to take radical responsibility. We can't change things around the world, but we can change things on a day-by-day basis within our own lives. And so that starts with, how do you talk to yourself? What's that voice in your head saying? Are you treating yourself as a valued friend, or are you giving yourself a hard time? How are you treating other people? Are you treating them with kindness?
Mm-hmm.
Are you assuming a negative motive before you've even found out? Or are you giving people, an opportunity? How are you turning up moment by moment? That you have absolute control over. And even when things are happening in your life that you cannot control, you can control the way in which you respond to it. And if all of us did that, then we will find that that things will change. And that's for me why it's so important that people start enlightened leadership by leading themselves. And I think of it like fireflies. So you and I are a firefly, and we've got a little a little glimmer of light, but then we connect with somebody else who is a little glimmer of light, and our light becomes bigger, and then collectively we come together and we can be a force for good. And we talked about the younger generation wanting to, protect endangered animals, wanting to protect the environment. It's time that we started to um, engage in a very different way about how we live our life, with moment by moment decisions that can make a difference. We can't change it all, but we can change the little bit where we are.
Yeah.
And you and I think our role is really important, because we actually illuminate what is going on with people who are offering great energy and a great contribution. And that's an antidote to all the negativity that there is around.
Yeah, and I think with purpose comes mission, and you have to have a mission. When I published my first book up there, Circle of Impacts, up there in 2018, as I was putting that together, I realized that my purpose was to help develop people to take personal initiative to create impact in their communities. That's my purpose. But I realized at the same time that that's not a goal. That's just a purpose. And as I began to think about this, because this was a turning point in my career, my life. It's 2018, so it's a few years ago. I decided that my mission, my goal of that purpose, was to move 1% of the world's population to take personal initiative to create impact in their local communities. And people began to ask me, so how are you going to do that? I said, I don't know. I'm not really responsible for that. People will be responsible for that. I will do what I will tell the story. I will encourage people, and everyone I meet, I will encourage, but it will take place in a very organic way over time. And by the end of my life, I think I will see that goal to have been realized. And I think that's the way change really happens, which is one person at a time deciding that they're going to make a difference and their life matters. And it matters not because it's going to happen globally. It's going to happen right there on their street, on their corner, in their school or their church or their business or their club or their gym, wherever it is. They're going to make that difference right then and there.
And everybody has an opportunity to do that moment by moment, don't they?
Every day, every hour, every minute. I mean, it really can be reduced that everything that we do can be focused in that sort of way. And
if we all did that and started to take, I got bang on about taking radical responsibility.
Yeah.
Starting with your thoughts, your beliefs, your actions, your words, we will have a different world.
Well, Gina, I'm grateful that you have been here. I'm thankful for who you are. I appreciate the work that you're doing. And my prayer is that your voice and your story and your impact will spread far and wide through this radio venture, and that there will be many people who will look to you and say, I heard her say something that changed my life. Because I think what you're saying is really important, and your legacy will be all these people who have been touched by you.
Thank you. I do hope so. And I know that your journey is there's such synergy between what we're both trying to do.
Yeah, there really is.
For people who are listening to this, recognize that we are not special in our specialness, if that makes sense. That any one of you who's listening to this, you have the capacity and the power to make the decisions moment by moment that can make a huge difference to you and the people around you. And my challenge to you is go for it.
Yeah. We're all special, but we're not unique. How about that? Well, thank you. And we'll put whatever you want in the show notes so that people can find you and listen to your radio show and enjoy discovering what is possible. If they only decide that they get out of their head and get out and start doing things that really matter.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. And thanks for the opportunity.
And thank you. And thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. And we'll see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye-bye.